Today's episode is proudly sponsored by Businessolver. As a leader in benefits technology transforming the total healthcare experience, Businessolver has studied empathy in the workplace since 2015. And honestly, they've found that empathy has never been more instrumental in attracting and retaining talent. But what does empathy look like? From their survey of more than 3,000 employees in 6 different industries, the results are in. And talent is looking for flexible work arrangements, employers that ease the stigma around taking time off work, and renewed commitments to DEI. Are you ready to infuse empathy into your company culture? Visit businessolver.com/empathy.
The future of work isn't about shareholder value, technology, metrics, or automation. It's about being human and putting people first through actionable love. Welcome to the Love in Action podcast, where we hold deep conversations with extraordinary people to help you grow as a leader and expand your business. Here's your host, Marcel Schwantes.
Hey, welcome to the show. Glad you are here. If you're a first-time listener, we are elated that you would drop by and spend time with us. We circle the globe now in 168 countries. And hey, by the way, this is our mission. I don't think I've ever said this out loud on the show before. Not sure why, but you'll probably hear this a lot from now on. Our mission on the show is to unleash the human spirit to reach its full potential through love in action. And I get this a lot when people hear the word love. Love, Marcel? What do you mean? Love. It's like they get an allergic reaction or something, because, the word love should never, ever be lumped together with business, right? So the conventional wisdom goes, well, I beg to differ. Love in this sense is in how we use it on this show. It's not romantic love. It's not, friendship love, familial love. It's not a feeling. It's a verb. It's packed with pro-social behaviors and positive intent on behalf of serving the needs of all stakeholders, especially employees on the front lines who deserve our love because, they are the people that make your business go around. So stick around. And if you like what you hear, please share this episode far and wide with a friend and leave us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. We would be grateful for that. Okay, so here is the $1 million question. When was the last time you dealt with bad behavior at work? Maybe you had a disagreement with a coworker. Now they're your enemy. They stopped talking to you. So yes, conflict does happen because we're all different and we may see things through different lenses, beliefs, values, and worldviews. But what if you're in an environment that has really difficult people to work with? How do you manage your own emotions and diffuse conflict so that things don't spiral out of control? And okay, let's be brutally honest here. Sometimes we have to acknowledge that the problem is not them, it's us. We may be the source of someone's problems and they're now acting out and making our lives a living hell. But the question then becomes, what are we contributing to the problem? So we all want to get along with our coworkers, and we should, because when we have good relationships at work, this is a no-brainer, folks. We are more productive, we are more engaged, we're more creative, and we work better together. So that's the premise of a new book that caught my attention late last year. It was released in September. And it's called Getting Along, How to Work with Anyone, Even Difficult People. It's authored by someone I highly admire and follow. That's Amy Gallo, contributing editor at Harvard Business Review. So in this book, Amy shares insights, tools, and techniques based on interviews that she conducted over more than a decade with social psychologists, workplace experts, and neuroscientists about dealing with difficult coworkers. She even shares some really painful stories from people who have dealt with difficult coworkers. Like, for example, the manager who asked a team member to reschedule their wedding day because it conflicted with an important trade show. I'm sure you got your own horror stories too. Amy has plenty of them. But she also reveals how people are able to transform negative working relationships to more positive ones. And that's what we're after. And how any of us can develop good coping mechanisms to improve our situation when dealing with these difficult people. Amy also identifies 8 archetypes. These are, people that you might be working with right now, or perhaps you're one of them. And each of these archetypes is a common type of difficult person that we may be facing. Amy Gallo, as I mentioned, is a contributing editor at Harvard Business Review, where she writes about workplace dynamics. She is the author of the HBR Guide to Dealing with Conflict, and she co-hosts HBR's Women at Work podcast. As a speaker and workshop facilitator, Amy has helped thousands of leaders deal with conflict more effectively and navigate complicated workplace dynamics. She is a graduate of Yale University and has a master's in public policy from Brown University. And now Amy joins us. Amy, welcome to the Love in Action podcast.
Thank you, Marcel. It's great to be here.
Yeah, this has been a long time coming. I know we had to reschedule. I got sick and here we are. So glad that you are here.
Me too. Thanks for having me.
I appreciate that. Amy, we have this traditional kickoff question for our listeners to kind of get acquainted with you. You ready?
Mm-hmm.
What's your story?
And we have 8 hours to answer this, right? So I think one of the most relevant things or most influential things in my life is the fact that I was raised by a single mom and who had a career she loved and was a very busy working mom. And we grew up in a town where it was not normal for women to have a job outside the home, and it wasn't normal to be a single mom. And my mom was very resourceful. So when people ask me, who were you raised by? First answer, of course, was my mom. But then there's this whole ecosystem of people, friends of hers, that stepped in and played a critical role in raising me and my brother. And these range from, neighbors who she befriended soon after she was divorced, to colleagues she met at work, to boyfriends she had at the time. And, what was really amazing, and I didn't appreciate it at the time, but I do now, is just she was teaching me the value of surrounding yourself with important relationships that are fulfilling, that are caring, that are loving. And this idea that the primary source of love for a child needs to come from the parents, absolutely agree with that. But there's so many more sources of love and caring that for me played such a critical role in who I became and also made me feel safe in the world.
That's awesome. Even for a 2-parent family, the saying is it takes a tribe.
That's right.
And I remember growing up as well, having mentors in my life, male mentors, of course. And I mean, now it doesn't matter, male or female. You want to surround yourself with people that are going to kind of help you to develop in the areas, of your interest. And so I got a 9-year-old right now, and I'm making sure that I'm going to surround him as well. And he's at that age now, because pretty soon it's going to be preteens and then teens. Yep. And to keep him out of trouble, I want to make sure that he is surrounded, just like you were growing up with. Well,
I'll tell you, and I'll tell you, I have a 16-year-old. So talk about keeping out of trouble. What's amazing is I realize that those people my mom surrounded me with are now a critical part of her life too. So when she thinks about who her grandparents are, there's a whole cast of people. And yes, I want them to help her keep out of trouble, but I also want her to be able to go to them if she does get in trouble. And that was just invaluable for me.
That's fantastic. All right, so let's dive in to explore this fantastic book of yours. So Amy, you start off the book with a chapter on why work relationships are worth the trouble. That's the exact saying. So can I play a little bit of devil's advocate here for a second?
Please.
So some people are going, Marcel, it's just work. I don't need to be buddy with anyone. I'm here to take care of business. And work is stressful enough as it is. It's fierce. It's competitive. Of course, in certain places, that's how it is, right? Everyone is fighting for resources and looking after themselves. So a lot of people come from that frame of mind. But you're saying friendships at work matter. So why should we care here?
Yeah. And I have to say, I empathize for those who are like, work is work. What are you doing?
Yeah.
Right. Work isn't personal. What are you doing? I also felt that way for a long time. And, through personal experience of connecting with coworkers in lots of the places I work, I started to see the benefits. And there are decades of research that show the more we think of our coworkers as friends, the better the outcomes for us in our organizations. We're more engaged. We feel more fulfilled. We are more productive. We're more resilient. We have better cognitive functioning when we have friends at work. Now, that doesn't mean everyone's going to be your BFF or you need to, get involved in every drama and everything going on at work. But it does mean it can help to have, what's called in the research, companionate love with your coworkers. And that just means a sense of caring, a sense of you have each other's back. You're looking out for each other. And again, the research is so clear on this. There's one study actually from a group at Rutgers that looked at performance reviews and people who said they had a best friend at work tended to have higher performance ratings than those who said they didn't have a best friend at work. I mean, we're seeing it in the actual numbers, the impact that having these close, positive relationships with our coworkers really give us.
Yeah. Every work environment I've been in my corporate past, there's, we held on to these tightly knit communities of collaborating really well. And there was always maybe one or two people that sort of broke themselves off from the pack and wanted to just, they were lone rangers. And I'm not saying that they were introverts, because it wasn't a question of personality type, but they just didn't see the value in being part of the community to kind of cohabit together during the 8 to 5, 8 to 6 hours. I mean, we spend more awake hours at work than we do with our own families.
That's right.
So why wouldn't you want to develop relationships to work better together? We're not saying that you have to be, like you said, you don't have to be a BFF during those work hours, but it would be helpful if you actually leaned in.
Yeah.
To get to know people and to kind of, there's your book title, to get along with them.
That's right.
For business reasons.
Yeah. Well, and for well-being, the research is also clearly shows, and I don't think my mom knew this research when she was raising us, but the research shows the quality of your life is dependent on the quality of your relationships. Now, of course, that means family. Of course, that means partner, community, friendships, but that also means coworkers. And I have empathy for those lone rangers, people who are like, I don't want to get involved. I have my life outside work. I don't need this. I understand. And that's a choice you can make. And certainly no one should be punished or ostracized for doing that, but you won't reap the benefits that we see from having closer relationships with your colleagues.
And you're you're talking whole life benefits. So what you're saying is all of the great stuff that happens at work, you carry that forward into your personal life with your family, friends, neighbors, community.
That's right.
Fantastic.
That's right.
All right. I want to get into the archetypes.
Yeah.
We may face at work. This is the sort of the bulk of your book, the majority of it. And those are the people that we may perceive as those, quote, those big jerks, making our lives miserable, so goes the saying. So this is where I can almost hear you listeners going, yeah, time to stick it to the man, Marcel. Let's hear it, right? But before you start pointing the finger at those archetypes, you say we need to clean up our side of the street. So what's the context here?
Yeah. So, of course, I wanted to write a book that would help people who are dealing with people they find challenging, difficult, pushes their buttons. But it's sort of impossible to give advice on how to do that without having some sense of self-awareness and some idea of how you are contributing to that dynamic, but with your coworker. Now, are there bullies? Are there toxic people who just, no matter what you do, they will not change. They're going to make your life miserable. Yes, that's true. But chances are, in most situations, there's some way that you are either reacting to the situation, the mindset your user going in is tainting the situation, or even some of your own behaviors are triggering the behavior in the other person. So the idea of cleaning up your own side of the street is thinking, okay, what am I? How can I make sure my thoughts, actions, behaviors are aligned with my values, that are aligned with my goal, with my goal in this relationship, whether it's to get along, whether it's to improve the relationship, whether it's to just get the project done. Am I sure that the way I am composing myself is in line with that goal and in line with my values?
Yeah, I love that you said that we have to raise our self-awareness to kind of get the full picture.
Yeah.
It's not always blame, and point finger. The saying goes, for every finger you point at somebody, there's 3 pointing back at you. So it's like raising your self-awareness. This is a case for also developing your emotional intelligence to kind of understand, different people and how they operate within your sphere of influence. So, so these 8 archetypes, you help us to identify these toxic. Well, I don't know if all of them are toxic or not, but they are difficult to deal with, right?
They're difficult, and I hesitate. I don't use the word toxic in the book very much partly because I think toxic. First of all, I don't know if we should call people toxic. That's a little, they may have toxic behaviors. You may work in a toxic work environment. I believe that, but also because those extreme behaviors, bullying, retaliation, those really start veering into legal issues, HR issues. This book is really about how do I deal with the difficult behaviors, the patterns of behavior that my colleague is exhibiting that may not be a legal issue or an HR issue, but are really still causing me quite a bit of stress and anxiety.
This episode is probably sponsored by Businessolver. People are at the heart of everything that Businessolver does as a company. Their people share new ideas to improve products and processes that serve their customers, because people are at the heart of everything you do too. Taking care of people is key to keeping up in today's marketplace. In their research, Businessolver found that although empathy at work is on the decline in recent years, managers have never been more instrumental, increasing 25% since the pandemic. More than a third of employees say their manager has the greatest impact on building an empathetic work culture. Businessolver believes that empathy is so crucial to business today, they've been researching it since 2015. Their State of Workplace Empathy study aims to educate people on the evolving meanings of flexibility, diversity, and other drivers of culture. So what are the behaviors, policies, and values of an empathetic organization? Discover actionable data at businessolver.com/empathy. And one of those that causes stress and anxiety, I think some of you will definitely identify with. Okay, so I wanted to pick I will start out with the passive aggressive person. So this is a coworker that makes these jabs at you, and then the next day they're playing the victim role. So it's like, who am I dealing with here? Right. So let's start with the passive aggressive. First of all, what's going on inside the mind of this person? What causes somebody to act this way?
Yeah. Well, I actually would love to turn that question to your listeners, because first of all, I don't think any of us can say that we have never behaved passive aggressively, right? It is a behavior that many of us resort to, sometimes without even realizing it. So I would say for those listening, think about the time you last behaved passive aggressively and why did you do that? What was motivating you? And often what we see is that it's a fear of conflict, right? It's a conflict avoidant behavior or a fear of rejection. We are afraid if we are truthful about what we think and feel, that the person won't like us or will reject us. It's a fear of failure, right? I don't want to have to deliver the bad news to my colleague or to my boss. So I just avoid it as much as possible. Or, I'm asked to do something. This is a classic passive aggressive behavior, right? I'm asked to do something. I say, I'll do it. Oh yeah, sure. Agree in the meeting. And then I just don't, right? Or I do it poorly. And that's, all of that is motivated by fears and often anxiety about what would happen if I was very straightforward about what I'm thinking and feeling.
It's interesting because I always, some people may just assume that this is a very manipulative person, and we jump into that conclusion that they're just trying to take advantage of you. But there's other things going on in their heads that we need to understand.
Yeah.
So
and rarely. Yeah. I don't think anyone goes home from work and says, wow, I was so passive aggressive today, right? We don't even think of it that way. We think, oh, I was petty or I was avoidant, right? It's not there are manipulative people who will use passive aggression to get what they need. But I think more often than not, it's something else that we're trying to avoid.
Yeah. All right. So I'm working with a passive aggressive person. What's the best way to approach that individual?
Yeah. Well, first I will say have some empathy for yourself, because it is not easy, right? Working with someone who's passive aggressive can feel like shadow boxing, right? You're trying to land a comment, a question, something, and they're just, dodging it left and right. So, you're going to have a range of emotions. Those are acceptable, but keep an open mind, because I think one of the things that comes into play, particularly with passive aggression, but with any of the archetypes, is confirmation bias. So as soon as I decide, oh, Marcel is so passive aggressive, everything you do, I now see through that lens. So try to keep an open mind and really focus on what are the specific behaviors that your colleague is doing that are problematic.
Yeah.
One of the tactics that tends to work, not always, but sometimes, and is worth certainly trying, is to think about what is the underlying message. So maybe they're rolling their eyes, maybe they're sending a snarky email, maybe they're avoiding the conversation, but what is it all beneath the surface that you think is actually going on? You may not know for sure, that's fine, but come up with a hypothesis, and then in a very neutral way, test that hypothesis. So when they say something that's indirect, you might say, what I hear under that message is that you aren't happy with the way this project's rolling out, and you wish we would step back and reconsider it. Is that true? I may be off base, but is that what's going on, right? And they may avoid altogether. They may like, nope, I'm fine with it, right? They might dive back into their passive aggressive reaction, but at least you've given them, the awareness that you're going to pay attention, that you are concerned about what their true thoughts and feelings are. And that's, going back to cleaning up your own side of the street, the other thing to think about is, what have you done? What may you have you done to encourage some of the passive aggression? Have you made it clear that you don't like to be disagreed with? Do you not like conflict? So you send the signal that they shouldn't disagree with you. Have you made it unsafe to fail on your team? Think about the ways that you might have been encouraging this behavior, and then see if you can sort of counteract that by even saying things like, I know I don't always react well when people disagree with me, but I do truly want to hear your opinion.
Yeah,
right?
Amy, I love that, because at first you're challenging your own assumptions about the other person being the source of the problem. By, again, I just love this whole idea of clean your side of the street first. Okay, what falls on your side? What are you responsible for, basically, that may be triggering this individual to act that way? So
yeah.
And so you're taking a higher road here by doing that, because it could be really disarming for that individual if you say, hey, tell me, is it something that I have done? Mm-hmm. And that kind of frees that person up to say, well, yeah, you did something, and then you guys can talk about it.
Yeah. Well, and we know from negotiation research, one of the best ways to get someone to change their mind is to signal your willingness to change your mind. So if you show up and say, you know what, I'm not super proud of how I've been acting in our meetings. I've been a little aggressive or I've been defensive. I'm going to really make an effort to change that going forward, right? That gives them a little bit of room, and they won't always take it, but it gives them room to think, well, how do I want to be different? Or how have I been showing up? Or maybe there's something that's been weighing on their mind that they can say, you know what? I'm glad you said that. I actually feel like I haven't been 100% honest with you. Right. And so you're just trying to loosen the dynamic between you so that it can change in some way.
That's good. That's good. Okay. How about this one? We've all worked with someone who they can't seem to find anything positive to say. I mean, ever. And they even seem to just enjoy pointing out all the ways that something has failed, a project, a strategy, right? These are really critical people. They criticize you behind your back and decisions that are made. So this is the classic pessimist.
Yeah.
And I think that pessimists can really drag you down because, if we're not careful, we might get sucked into their vortex of negativity and then we begin to see things their way.
Yeah.
So,
And they have a lot of power, right? So people who have a contrarian view, who tend to be cynics or pessimistic, we afford them more credence, right? We if everyone in the room is starting to sort of coalesce around an idea, and this person is like, "Wait, I don't think this will ever work," we give them a lot more attention than we would than someone who was agreeing. So they can have an outsized influence on a team dynamic that can be really dangerous for a team.
Yeah, it sure can. Okay, so is there some psychological reason or driver here? What's going on inside the person's mind as to why they have such a negative outlook?
Yeah. Well, again, similar to the passive aggressive archetype, it's often driven by fear, and that they don't want to fail. They don't want to appear that they aren't smart enough. That oftentimes people will be contrarian or pessimistic because they want to appear as if they have power, or they want to appear intelligent. And
it's an insecurity.
It's an insecurity. And to be fair, if we sort of take the judgment out of it, there's this concept in social psychology called motivational focus. And people who are optimists tend to be promotion focused. They look for the opportunities. They're focus on forward momentum. People with a prevention focus, which pessimists often fall into, really are good at assessing risks, at preventing future calamities from happening. And so, they do serve an important role. And we don't want to dismiss pessimists outright, because sometimes they're pointing out risks that are real risks and that we might miss otherwise. So, we got to appreciate what they bring, while also making sure that they don't, sort of send the gray cloud over the entire team or the entire project.
Right. So let's say that this person is the scale is tipping towards it's a dark, cloudy day almost every day here. So, all right. Right. And you're at the brink of, all right, do I need to find another place to work? So what are some techniques we need to use now it's like, okay, manage ourselves around this extreme pessimist, and also maybe bring that person to kind of seeing a different way of doing things.
Yeah. So I'll share one thing definitely not to do, and then two things that you might do. So the thing not to do is to insist on optimism. So, your listeners have probably heard this concept of toxic positivity, right? The many organizations where we just insist that we're optimistic, we're positive, and we don't allow for the full range of emotion that people feel. Plus, pessimists tend to think that optimists are idiots. They're naive, right? So the more you insist, no, it's all going to work out. No, it's going to be good. No, this is going to succeed. The more they will be entrenched in their view of you just don't see it clearly. And they might be more negative than they actually feel, because they feel the need to counteract that positivity.
Right. So avoid the power struggle at all costs with these people. Okay.
Exactly. So what you do instead is sort of grant them their premise. And by that, I mean, you don't have to say, oh, you're right, this is all going to fall apart, right? But you can say, part of me agrees that there are big risks here. Another part of me actually feels like if we did this and this, we could succeed, right? So just trying to make sure that you're not dismissing their concerns outright, but that you're helping to endorse them, not by saying they're 100% true, but allowing that they might be true. I think that can really help. The other thing is to ask questions, open-ended questions. Like if they say, well, that will never succeed, say, well, what would it take for it to succeed? What would have to be different? Under what circumstances do you think this would actually be a possibility? You might also assign them the devil's advocate role because they're so good at identifying the risk. You might even say, this is your real strength. We'd love for you to point out the risk. We're going to consider them along with everything else. And we really appreciate you doing that. Now,
you're trying to draw them out of that negativity by asking these questions.
Yeah, exactly. And then the last thing I would say, because you alluded to this when you were talking about this archetype, is that it can be really contagious, right? This gray cloud over the whole team can be really hard on everyone. So really try to make sure that you, as an individual who's having to deal with a pessimist, who's complaining, who's, just so negative in their thoughts and actions, make sure that you're spending time with people who tend to be more positive, just to counteract some of that and to remind yourself that this is not this doom and gloom is not the only way to see the world or to see your work or to see the project you're working.
Yeah, I love that, because if you set boundaries against this extreme pessimist, that dark cloud hanging over their heads might change one day and become a sunny day when they see that, hey, you know what? I'm the outcast here. And so I better get with the program because these people are positive, they're contributing, et cetera. So it's like, you don't want to be the outcast walking under your own dark cloud every day. So I love that. By seeking more positivity, more coworkers that are optimists, hopefully you're drawing the pessimist into the fold, right? So
or they might just develop the self-awareness to realize they're a pessimist and that's going to be their viewpoint, and then they can actually acknowledge that, like, I know I'm the one who always points out the risk, but I have to say, right? Like, and that is less harmful, less stressful than someone who's like, no, everything will go wrong, right? And so, even getting them to see the impact that their pessimism has on the team can be really helpful in trying to neutralize that effect.
Yeah, it's funny that you said that sometimes they do play to their strengths to kind of warn us about risks involved, and because is it fair to say that a team may be way too idealistically optimistic, where we need to counter that by having somebody that maybe sees things a little bit pessimistic to kind of balance things out?
Yeah, I mean, groupthink is real, right? And I think a lot of it, who wouldn't want to believe the best is going to happen? I think we tend to sort of fall into that of like, this could work if we do this and this, which might be true, but many times because that we're sort of naturally inclined to agree with people. It's how we've survived as a species, is in community and connection with others. Because of that being hardwired for likability, sometimes we don't raise the concerns we have or the issues we have. So, as I said earlier, you don't want to dismiss the pessimist outright. They may be playing a really important role on your team.
Yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out. Okay, I'm going to pull one more archetype from the book just for the sake of time here. So sure. I've dealt with this one many times. It's the know-it-all. The person that thinks that they have all the answers. They may be that person in meetings that they talk too much. They just can't stop talking. They speak over you. They interrupt a lot. And just for the record, they're usually really smart people. Don't get me wrong, but because they know all the facts and they know how the business runs, they may lack the self-awareness to kind of understand maybe the nuances of a situation involving people. So this is somebody that I would say is convinced in their minds that they're the smartest person in the room. Perhaps they are, but help us to understand better about the know-it-all behavior.
Yeah. And this chapter was not easy to write because it's the one I identify most with of the archetypes. When I think about which one am I most like, it is the know-it-all. But it also gives me a little bit of insight into why people behave this way. And part of it is that especially US work culture, we tend to really reward overconfidence. Now, overconfidence is natural. One of my favorite statistics about this is that something like 73% of drivers think they're above average in terms of driving skills, which is a statistical impossibility, right? So, right. But people also think they're going to be more likely to get a job than they are, that they're going to, their initial salary coming out of their graduate program is going to be higher. We tend to just have this confidence that not everyone, but it's a natural thing to feel. And then we reward it, partly because often it's about things that we don't have sort of hard measures like leadership or managing, right? It's hard to say this person scores an 87 on leadership, though lots of people do quantify those things. So we rely on people to tell us how good they are at these things. And that means that we tend to value confidence over competence. So the know-it-all may be driven, again, by fear and insecurity, trying to prove themselves, but they also just may believe they know more than others.
Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned that being overconfident. I had Dr. Tomas Chamorro Premuzic on the show a while back, and he wrote the book on why, I forget the title, but it was very provoking.
Why so many incompetent men become leaders. Yep.
That one.
Yeah.
And he's talking about how we hire leaders based on confidence. Of course, we want leaders who are confident, but then confidence can easily turn to overconfidence, which now we see the narcissistic behaviors that are so prevalent, in the C-suite with the people in the highest levels.
Yeah. Tomas, his work really informed this chapter. I interviewed him for this chapter because it is that work around the way that we sort of value confidence over competence is really important. And the know-it-all, just thinking about Tomas's work, the know-it-all is also one of the flavors of the know-it-all is the mansplainer, right? Someone who really feels like their ideas and their voice is much more important, or their expertise is much more important. And then add that to the gender bias that often we don't allow women to sort of claim expertise or, explain how their areas of experience, then the know-it-all might talk over them, interrupt them, talk down to them, etc.
Okay, Amy. So how do we deal with the know-it-all? I mean, what do you recommend?
Yeah. So there's a couple things. One, I would say, first and foremost, if this is someone who just proclaims things without any basis for that proclamation, which I will admit, something I sometimes do, it can be helpful to just ask for facts and data, right? Yeah. So what are you basing that on? Oh, I have a different assumption. Where did you get this information, or what makes you believe that? What's another way of viewing that? All right, if you think our customers are never going to go for this new pricing scheme, right? How might someone else see it, right? How might someone in finance see it, or someone in marketing? Just trying to sort of help them see there's a different way of viewing this, and to put them on notice that I'm not just going to let you proclaim, right? I'm going to ask for the facts behind what you're saying. Now, that can feel a little confrontational, depending on your style. That might not be as comfortable. One of the other things that's really important with a know-it-all is one of their sort of hallmark behaviors is interrupting or talking over you. And so you can preempt that behavior by even saying it before you start talking. I mean, it helps me to finish my thought before people jump in. So can you just please hold any questions or comments till I'm finished?
I love it.
And if you're getting interrupted over and over and your attempts to say, I'm speaking, I'd like to finish my point, don't work, then you want to enlist the help of allies, people in the room who can speak up on your behalf. And you might go and say, Marcel, I get interrupted by Amy, 3 times in a meeting. I find it really frustrating. I think it undermines me. Would you mind when he does that, or when she does that, to say, Amy's not done, or Marcel's not done talking. Can you wait? And I'd like to hear what he has to say. So just enlisting help from the group is often, and with many of these behaviors and archetypes, oftentimes that positive peer pressure of creating group norms and team norms can really help to counteract some of those behaviors.
That's exactly what I just noticed. It applies to any of the archetypes. You set group norms, you set boundaries against those behaviors.
That's right.
Okay, so those are some of the do's. What are some of the absolute don'ts with the know-it-all?
With the know-it-all, you don't want to get into a power struggle of I'm right, you're right, right? You don't want to do that. You don't want to get in a position where you're trying to take them down as a result. You basically don't want to retaliate with the same behavior. And every time they act like a know-it-all or they say something. I actually had a coaching client who had a tendency to say, oh, at my last organization, because he had worked at a prestigious organization, and it just rubbed his colleagues the wrong way. And we worked to sort of develop his awareness that he was doing that, of like sort of being this know-it-all in that way. But he couldn't stop it completely. He really tried. And so really part of dealing with him was accepting that, okay, he's going to say that once in a while. And rather than let it sort of eat you up inside, it's just like, that's what he says. Let me actually listen to the rest. And you can't address every single transgression with a know-it-all or of any of the archetypes. So you really need to just sort of pick your battles and decide when is it going to be most effective to address the behavior and when are the times when I can let it go.
Yeah.
But I would also say, do not let them make you feel small, especially in front of other people. And that's owning your own expertise, addressing the behavior when it needs to be addressed, and then remembering that just because they're condescending to you, because they're being a know-it-all, does not mean it's not reflective of you. That's about them.
Yeah. So we covered 3 archetypes. We've barely scratched the surface to understand these people better. And folks, I urge you, go get Amy's book to fully understand all 8 archetypes and how to cope in more positive ways. All right, Amy says, we wind down here. What if everything we've tried doesn't work and we still cannot get along with a coworker? I mean, what do you recommend at that point?
Yeah, and that is a reality. I would love to say, you're going to get my book and every relationship of yours at work is going to be positive or at least neutral. But sometimes we put in our best effort and like you say, the behavior just doesn't change. And in that case, it's really then a matter of protecting yourself, both mentally, but then also from a career perspective. So making sure you're documenting the behavior in case you make the decision to escalate it to someone who can do something about it, whether it's your manager, their manager, or HR, making sure that you have a real record of the behavior, when it happened, what happened, and what you tried to do to address it, as well as the business impact, right? You want to make sure you can show that this behavior is impeding the team's progress, holding back a project, something that someone who would be able to intervene would care about. And then also just setting some boundaries. And I mean that both practically. So the Pessimist is a great example. If there's someone who just stops by your desk and complains incessantly, right? Have a few phrases in your back pocket so you can move on of like, oh, thanks for stopping by. I got to get to this email, or, I need to run out and get a cup of coffee. I'll be back in a little bit, whatever it is, so that you're minimizing the amount of interaction you have with them. And really, there's this concept called job crafting where you can, obviously you're not going to change your job description, but you can choose where you focus, both in terms of what you work on and who you work with, and in a way that makes it so you don't have to interact with these folks as much as little as possible. And then the boundaries mentally of, don't let yourself spend your entire day focused on your difficult colleague. It is tempting to do that, right? Thinking about them, ruminating about it. If you can set an alarm for 15 minutes, say, okay, I'm going to think about how much I don't like this person and how they're bothering me. And then at the end of the 15 minutes, move on, right? Just make sure it's time bound so that you're not allowing it to sort of take over your psyche.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it's ultimately our hope that as we send these cues and these signals and set these boundaries, that they're going to, like you said, raise their self-awareness to understand the changes that need to take place.
That's right.
So, yeah.
That's right.
Okay. All right, Amy. So we posed you the leadership love question, tradition on the show, and this is an interesting spin on this on this question for the longtime listeners. They expect this every week, but and here it is. The question is how do we lead with practical and actionable love and care day in and day out? But in this case, what would you say is a loving way to lead someone who is a really difficult person to work with?
Yeah. So, I think one of the things that has happened, I'm not sure the origin of it. I'm not sure how long it's been going on, but I think in the workplace, we often think of love as something that's positive and caring, which is true, but we've sort of disassociated it from honest and direct feedback. And I think sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to help someone realize the impact they're having on other people. And so I think in this case, love, when you're thinking about someone who's pushing your buttons, maybe irritating the team, love may look like taking the risk of saying, hey, I have some feedback for you. I just want you to understand the impact that your negativity, your insecurity, your passive aggressive behavior, your know-it-all-ness, whatever is having on your ability to meet your goals. And I think that in being willing to engage in that conflict, that difficult conversation is a true act of love.
Yeah. And you know what? Some people will hear that and they will accept it and they will thank you for your tough feedback. That's tough love.
Yeah.
Just
like parenting. Or they may, I always think about this. I worked with someone who made an inappropriate comment, and I really wrestled with how to address it. I finally addressed it. She was completely defensive. We had several conversations. It was so uncomfortable. And I presumed that it was a failure, right? My attempt to sort of call it out was a failure of our relationship with Simran. And then I heard from someone else we worked with who was like, oh, she really appreciated that you pointed that out to her. And so sometimes you won't get the reaction you expect. They won't say thank you. They won't, say, oh, you're so right, I'm going to change everything. But it gets in there. And I think that's the thing, is that sometimes taking the risk of just giving that gift, you don't have to be thanked, but know that even doing it sometimes that's the act. You
may plant a seed that it may not happen under your watch, but that person may turn around and in another season and hang on to something that you said 3 months ago and finally see the light, later.
That's right.
And and helps with their own professional development. That is my hope.
Yes.
Is that kind of tough love where you say what you need to say in a tactful way, not in a judging, blamey way, but in a way that's going to help them to shift their mind. Absolutely. I think that is something that we should do more of if we're courageous enough.
Yeah. I mean, and this is like my biggest takeaway from my work around conflict and difficult people is that we often think of disagreeing or standing up for ourselves or advocating for ourselves or pointing out something that's not going right as unkind or as disruptive. And I just completely believe that disagreeing is not only important to do, but it's a generous act because it involves some risk for you. But as long as you do it with compassion and kindness and empathy, right, then ideally it will be received in the way that you hope it will be.
Fantastic. All right, we bring it home with 2 questions, Amy, as we do with every guest. Personally, what's really tugging at your heart right now that you'd like us to know?
Oh, I think one of the things I'm really concerned about is the way that we're handling our difficult relationships, difficult conversations in remote work. I think we're we all feel a little less human in these environments. I think that we tend to avoid conflict in them because the hurdle is higher for actually having these conversations. So one of the things I'm really sort of keeping an eye on is just, making sure that the organizations I work with, the teams I work with, don't become completely conflict avoidant as a result of the ways in which we're interacting now.
Perfect. And finally, you close us out, Amy, with a key takeaway or something to keep us inspired.
Yeah. So I think and this, I'll try to keep something really practical because I always love to give practical takeaways, which is one of the mindsets I think that's really helpful to go into these, tricky interactions or tricky relationships, is to not think about it as you versus the other person. It's really easy to get into sort of picture it as a tug of war or a battle. But what I really like to think of is that it's me, the other person, and then there's a third entity, which is the problem that we're trying to solve. And that might be the initiative we're working on, the deadline we need to get to, or it might just be how we treat one another. And for me, seeing myself on the same side of the table as that person, even just as a mental exercise, can put me in a more collaborative, open-minded, and even sort of, get into that problem-solving focus so that me and the other person are no longer at odds, but we're actually collaborating to achieve something together.
Yeah. This has been such a good conversation. Amy, if people want to connect with you, can you point them somewhere that they can go and get to know you, get to know what you do, et cetera?
Sure. Yeah. So if you love podcasts, which I assume you do if you're listening to this show, I definitely suggest checking out the Harvard Business Review Women at Work podcast, which I co-host. And if you want to stay in touch with me, find my book, find my writing, you can go to my website, which is amyegallo.com. You can sign up for my newsletter there. You can, like I said, find different links to purchase my book, both of my books, and also find some of my writing from HBR.
The book, again, is called Getting Along, How to Work with Anyone, Even Difficult People. She is Amy Gallo. Amy, thank you so much for blessing us with your wisdom today. We're all much, much better for it.
Thank you, Marcel. This has been a really fun conversation.
And you can keep the conversation going on social media with hashtag Love in Action Podcast, and also look for my show notes on my website, marcelschwantes.com. You can find all the resources there to this episode, including a YouTube link if you prefer to watch it. I'll watch the show from now on. And finally, hey, we're always looking for sponsors. So if you want to help us to spread the Love in Action movement globally, let's chat. Reach me on my website or find me on LinkedIn. I want to thank today's sponsor, Businessolver, for making this episode happen. Leaders who want to motivate their people in today's workplace must realize that empathy is a non-negotiable. Let's continue this conversation by exploring their findings at businessolver.com/empathy.
Thank you for listening to the Love in Action podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it, subscribe, and leave us a review. Until next time, don't forget, the future of leadership is love in action. Believe it, practice it, and watch your business grow.